Welcome to the New Life Ministries podcast. Have you ever lost a friend as you walked with Jesus? Jesus did too. For all the victories and blessings available to us when we follow Jesus, there are times we also have to grieve some losses. In this next section of John, the mood darkens. Jesus is telling his friends and disciples what they need to know once he is gone. Let's join Curtis as he looks at the second half of John 13.
So today we're going to look at John chapter 13. If you want to open it up in your Bible. For those of you joining us on our podcast, welcome to you. I'm glad you joined us. So 2 weeks ago, as you turn to the book of John chapter 13, 2 weeks ago my friend Rudy spoke on the first part of John 13 where Jesus washed his disciples' feet. And thank you for giving him a great experience here. When he went to the pastors' conference we were at last week, everybody was asking him how he did at New Life. It was great. How was New Life? It was very good. So today we're going to continue on with that passage. So this is a conversation between Jesus and his disciples, and it continues on for several chapters, and it covers many different topics. But we really could read chapter 13 all the way to the end of 17 in one piece, because it's one conversation. And this section is called the farewell discourse. Jesus is having a discussion with his disciples a few days before he is killed. And he's teaching them some final things. They don't know it yet, but he's saying farewell. And this is what you need to know as I'm about to leave. So this whole section has a darker tone to it. And we don't always catch the darker tone because we don't usually read it in one big piece. We read it just in sections. The disciples are having dinner with Jesus. They're having a great time, as you normally do when you're having dinner with your friends. They don't know what's coming, but Jesus knows. And as he begins to talk and tell them what he wants to tell them, the mood changes and it gets darker. And so to help us have that dark sense of a dark tone, we're going to play some background music. And this might work, this might not work. This is not a musical. I'm not singing. And I want to thank a gentleman named Landon Zientara for providing the music. Thank you very much for giving us permission to use your composition this morning. His work can be found on YouTube, and if you're watching our podcast or you check it out later, we'll have a link to his work. So we're just going to begin it, and we're just going to let it just affect the tone. So let's go back, and let me bring you back into the text. Jesus has just washed his disciples' feet. And I invite you to start with verse 14 in chapter 13. So verse 14. Now that I, your Lord and teacher, have washed your feet, you also should wash one another's feet. I have set an example that you should do as I have done for you. I tell you the truth, no servant is greater than his master, nor is a master greater than the one who sent him. Now that you know these things, you will be blessed if you do them. So today we're going to pick up from verse 18. I'm not referring to all of you. I know those I have chosen. But this is to fulfill the passage of Scripture which says, he who shares my bread with me has lifted up his heel against me. I'm telling you now before it happens, so that when it does happen, you will believe that I am he. Very truly I tell you, whoever accepts anyone I send accepts me, and whoever accepts me accepts the one who sent me. After he said this, Jesus was troubled in spirit and testified, very truly I tell you, one of you is going to betray me. His disciples stared at one another, at a loss to know which of them he meant. One of them, the disciple whom Jesus loved, was reclining next to him. Simon Peter motioned to this disciple and said, ask him which one he means. So leaning back against Jesus, he asked him, Lord, who is it? And Jesus answered, it is the one to whom I will give this piece of bread when I have dipped it in the dish. Then, dipping the piece of bread, he gave it to Judas, the son of Simon Iscariot. And as soon as Judas took the bread, Satan entered into him. So Jesus told him, what you are about to do, do quickly. But no one at the meal understood why Jesus said this to him. Since Judas had charge of the money, some thought Jesus was telling him to buy what was needed for the festival, or to give something to the poor. As soon as Judas had taken the bread, he went out, and it was night. When he was gone, Jesus said, "Now the Son of Man is glorified, and God is glorified in him. And if God is glorified in him, God will glorify the Son in himself and will glorify him at once. My children, I will be with you only a little longer. You will look for me, and just as I told the Jews, so I tell you now, where I'm going you cannot come. A new command I give you, love one another. As I have loved you, so you must love one another. By this everyone will know you are my disciples if you love one another." Simon Peter asked him, "Lord, where are you going?" Jesus replied, "Where I'm going you cannot follow now, but you will follow later." Peter asked, "Lord, why can't I follow you now? I will lay down my life for you." Then Jesus answered, "Will you really lay down your life for me? Very truly I tell you, before the rooster crows, you will disown me 3 times." We're going to stop there. So that kind of worked. It's interesting how music can affect the flavor of what we read. It's different, hey? Yeah. I told Nolan, pretend this is a movie and you're providing the soundtrack. You did well. So the emphasis on this passage is on Judas, but then it moves to being about Jesus going away, the command to love one another, and then Jesus predicting Peter's denial. So let's first talk about Judas. In the moment when it all happened, it was a complete shock to the disciples that Judas was the one who betrayed Jesus. They didn't see this coming. So at the start of our text, Jesus quotes a line from the Psalms about a friend who strikes with his heel. And I don't think the disciples really kind of absorbed what he had said. So then he's more explicit. "I tell you the truth, one of you is going to betray me." And they just stared at each other with a loss to know which of them he meant. Like, who here would do such a thing? I mean, imagine looking around this room knowing that one of us was going to betray Jesus. We'd be like, what? Who here would do that? And so Peter asks the disciple right beside Jesus, find out who he means. So when they eat dinner in this setting, they're laying down. So at this meal, there would be a low table in the middle, probably rectangular, very low to the ground with the food on it. They're laying around the table with their head towards the table and their feet away from the table. And they might be on a small couch, a type of couch, or maybe not. They would have a cushion under their left arm, and they'd be leaning on their arm, and they'd be eating with their right. You always ate with your right hand. If you were working or if you were a servant, then you would eat standing or you would eat seated at a table. But if you're reclining, that's resting, that's celebrating. So this is an important, restful dinner. So when the disciple that Jesus loved asks Jesus who's he talking about, all he has to do, because he's on his left arm, all he has to do is kind of lean back a little. And if he leans back, his head is right in Jesus' chest. And so he can whisper, "Who is it?" And then Jesus can whisper back, "It's the one whom I give this piece of bread." Sharing food with somebody is a sign of friendship. It's always a sign of friendship. You ever gone to a restaurant, you're like, okay, let's say you're eating plate and fork, like, "Oh man, this is really good. Do you want to try some?" And then you can gauge the level of the relationship based on the answer. If the person goes, no, it's okay, that's where you're at. If the person says, "Yes, but I'll use my own fork," okay, that's where that's at. And if they eat right off your fork, you know you've got a pretty close friendship there. Or you're out with a buddy and you're like, "Oh man, your sandwich looks really good." And he's like, "Here, have a bite." Right? Like you share food with friends. So Jesus, when he offers Judas a piece of bread, it's friendship. Like, do you want to eat this out of my hand? Like it's that kind of, here's the fork of food. Do you want to try this? And one writer raised an interesting question. Was Judas on Jesus' left? So the disciple Jesus loved is here. There's Jesus. Was Judas here? Because then Jesus could just kind of lean back and offer the food. And then also whisper to do what he intends to do quickly. That would actually make more sense than if Judas was at the other side of the room or other side of the table. And so if Judas is here, that's a close friendship spot. Like you save that for your close friends. And Jesus may have just whispered to him, go do what you're going to do quickly. Like he may have just said it quietly, because clearly the rest of the room didn't see anything significant about what Jesus had said to him. So Jesus is offering this food to his friend. And then there's this question, did Judas understand that Jesus knew what he was about to do? Did Judas know Jesus was saying, I know you're about to betray me. Do it quickly. Because if so, that's horrible. Like it's horrible. A friend taking food from a friend's hand, in his mind, planning to betray Jesus. No one else is suspicious of it. He takes the food and resolves to do it. Look, it's horrible. And the others clearly did not understand what Judas was about to do, because if anybody had the inkling, they would have gotten up and stopped him. But I think they were too busy wondering who's going to betray Jesus that they missed what was happening. So let's pause on that experience of Jesus being betrayed by a friend. When Jesus recalls the incident now, how do you suppose he thinks about it? Now, today, when Jesus looks back to that moment, how do you think he thinks about it? Because he was not surprised. So Jesus quotes Psalm 41. Psalm 41 is a prayer for mercy. And in that psalm, it says, the world is turned against me. I am sick. My enemies are just waiting for me to die. And even my close friend, it says in verse 9, even my close friend, someone I trusted, who shared my bread, has lifted up his heel against me. To lift up a heel is to bring it back down again. If you have to break something on the ground, how do you do it? You stomp on it. That's the idea. He lifted up his heel to stomp. So Jesus got stomped on. So I think it's important to honor that Jesus got betrayed by his friend. And I wonder if Jesus looks back and misses his friendship with Judas. Like even today, that Jesus would look back, I miss that guy. There are certain victories you will experience as you walk with Jesus. You will get an internal sense of freedom, and you will become a new person. You will find you have strength to no longer do the sin that you want to do. You will discover truth, and your wounds will be healed. There will be a new behavior that comes out of you that will change how people respond to you. But for all the victories you experience, you will also experience some losses. There will be people who leave you behind because they don't want to be on the path that you are on. There are people who leave you behind. They just will reduce their friendship with you because they don't want to be where you're going. And there will be other friends who, when you feel vulnerable to temptation, they will be glad to push you down that road and to help you do the thing you don't want to do. And that's sad. That's frustrating. There's loss there. So even Jesus experienced the loss of friendship and betrayal when he followed God's will for his life. Jesus lost friends when he followed God's will. So what do you do with that? You must grieve, and you must grieve it with the Lord. So what does that mean? It means to share with the Lord the ache that is in your heart over what may never be. And to share with the Lord the frustration in your heart over what may never be. And to sit with it in the vulnerability, in the uncomfortableness of it, and to give it over to him. And it's easy to believe a lie that says, sitting with God and grieving won't do any good. But consider, when a child comes home from school and they've had a bad day, they just want to sit with their parent, be held, and talk about what happened. And as a parent, we want to do that for them. Does it change the day? Does it change what happened? No. Does the child feel better? Yes. That's grieving. So when we sit with God, we don't just think about the loss. We think about the loss while looking at the Lord. Like we bring it to Him. You draw your attention to focus on Him as you feel what you feel. It's a type of sharing. So if you were sitting with a sandwich and you say, would you like a bite of my sandwich? Would you like to share my sandwich? It's the same idea. I have pain and loss. Would you like to share in my pain and loss? Can I tell you about it? And you pause long enough with the Lord to lament, to share the feelings, to share the thoughts. Cry if you need to cry. Talk out the anger. Talk out the disappointment. And you do it not until the pain goes away, but until you've expressed it. Because the pain might continue. You can't just stay there until the pain goes away. But you express it, and then you'll have a moment where it's time to get up and continue. When you grieve your loss, you will find that you are freed up to love without demand. When you grieve your loss, you'll be able to love others without demanding from them. Because whether they love you back or serve you back, your loss is not weighing on you. You're free. You're freed up so you can give selflessly. Jesus lost a good friend when he decided to follow the Lord. But then this passage continues, and it's time for Jesus to be glorified. It's time to reveal God's glory. And Jesus says he's about to leave, and he tells his disciples, love each other. And Peter asks why he cannot follow, and Jesus says, you're going to deny me 3 times. And in the middle of all of this, we get these beautiful verses in verse 34. A new command I give you, love one another. As I have loved you, so you must love one another. And by this, everyone will know that you are my disciples if you love one another. This command gets repeated in a couple chapters, and we're going to expand on it more in a couple weeks. But to highlight, this command to love is in the context of betrayal and loss, questions and confusions and denial. This command is not love others when everything's going well for you, and it's not love others when things are going really well for them. This is things are going to be hard and confusing. That other person, those disciples, your friends, those people in church, they need you to love them. So love them. This command to love is in the context of loss and grief. And so let me expand. Remember I said this whole section, chapters 13 to 17, is the farewell discourse. He is saying farewell. Jesus is talking to his disciples about how to continue without him. How do you live when I'm gone from the earth? Have you ever either heard or said a thought that was something like, it would be so much easier to be a disciple of Jesus if he was still around on earth? How do we continue with him gone? That is exactly what this whole section is addressing. Jesus is taking 4 chapters. This is how you continue without me being here physically. And the first part of that is you must love each other. And love each other the way I have loved you. It's not love each other the way your mom and dad loved you. It's not love each other the way you love yourself. It's not love each other the way your friends love you. It's learn to show love the way Jesus loves you. And it's specific to people in the church. It's specific to disciples. There are other places in the Bible where it talks a lot about loving people in the world and loving the world. That's important. That's not this passage. This is those other disciples need you to love them because there's loss and grief and confusion in life. And so what does it mean to love each other? Well, as we saw at the start of chapter 13, the pattern Jesus gave us is to serve. each other, to wash each other's feet, to do tasks, to show care to each other. So the question is, what are the activities I can do? What are the activities you can do to serve others at church? I can sit with somebody and I can listen to their story. I can speak truth into their life. Or maybe I can help them with food and help them get a little bit extra support. It might be I can invest in the life of their children. It might be I can help them become healthy. The list is endless. However you have received love and blessing from the Lord, you can provide that same to other disciples. So over coffee, when we visit after the service, take a moment and look at the other people in this room and ask yourself, how can I love somebody here? How can I serve them? What can I do to show them the love that Jesus has shown me? So let me summarize where we've been. This whole section is darker in tone. And Jesus says one of them is going to betray him. They had no idea it would be Judas. Jesus treated Judas as a close friend. Here, eat this piece of food. And that close friend betrayed him. When a friend turns on us or leaves us behind because we are following the Lord, it is healthy to grieve that loss with Jesus. And in this context of betrayal, Jesus leaves, and Jesus is leaving, and there are questions, and there's confusion. Peter's about to deny him. In all of this context, Jesus says, you must love each other. Love as I have loved you, because they need you to. And he's teaching them, how do we continue once Jesus is physically gone? So over coffee, take a moment and look around and ask, what can I do to show the kind of love Jesus is showing me to someone else here? So let's pause there, stop there. What has the Spirit been drawing your attention to this morning? What has caught your attention? What has the Spirit been drawing your attention to this morning?
I think it's a really beautiful message. And a lot of times I think people will say things like they feel maybe lonely in a church, or like it's hard to connect in a church, or anyways, it's just an interesting, I just like the way you worded it of, are you loving each other? Like in general, as Christians, anyways, are you loving other disciples, and are you, anyways? I really enjoyed it. I feel like a lot of people in my life came to mind.
Yeah, that's interesting. When you shape it, you know how it is when you shape a talk, you have what you want to say, and then the Spirit has what he wants to say. And so that question of, how do I practice the love that God has shown me to the people I love? It was just interesting to sort of draw those connections. Jesus has done this, he's taught this, and that's actually what I tend to offer. Yeah.
And I think what's interesting is, like, I think a lot of times what I've felt in other churches is like this idea that, first and foremost, people love their immediate family and their immediate church circle. And then, like, whether or not they have time for their church circle. Anyways, and I find that, there's conversations around like programs around discipleship and like what it's going to look like. Anyways, and this is just a really beautiful message of you. It just has to be your circle. It has to be your brothers and sisters.
Yeah. Very cool.
I think there's a good possibility that Judas was one of the most respected disciples in that group. He was the treasurer.
He was the treasurer.
He had authority over how the money would be used, and it's quite possible that the disciples looked up to him. And sometimes it's like that with us too, that we have someone, or I've heard this happen of people. They say, I was very disappointed. I saw those Christians and I saw the terrible things they did, and so I don't want to have anything to do with the church. Missing the fact that the people in the church are not God. They're very sinful people like everyone else. And so we should not get discouraged when we see sad things happen with other people. in our church, maybe it's us, you know.
Yeah.
And Judas had that important position. And should people have rejected Christ and all the other disciples because of Judas? No, they shouldn't. But they were probably all very disappointed that Judas, the guy they trusted, the guy they thought maybe was high up on the pecking order, had disappointed them in the most glaring way.
Yeah.
I think it's sort of a reminder to us that we're all sinful. And when someone sins, even, and also in our church, that's not God doing it. That's the individual doing it, just like Judas was an individual.
Yeah, neat.
Jesus goes on to expand on this a couple chapters later.
Yeah.
That this is my command, that you love one another as I have loved you. No one has greater love than this, to lay down one's life for one's friends. You are my friends if you do what I command you. So we are to lay down our lives for our friends, and I've heard this church in various ways, and I don't think it means that we necessarily die for our friends. It's to put their interests first.
Yeah. In Isaiah, it talks about spending yourself. And I thought that was for me, that was a phrase that echoed. Just spending.
As in to die with oneself, to oneself.
Yeah. I bet if I would die for you, the person would turn to me and go, yeah, you'll deny me 3 times before the end of the week. That's exactly what someone would say to me.
I was going to repeat what you said because I really liked this thing. So when you grieve your loss, you are freed up to love without demand.
Yeah.
So that was really helpful.
It seems like often when terrible things are happening in the world, like when Barry was summarizing what's happening in Ethiopia, so often our human response is some version of, why doesn't God stop that? Why is God letting that happen? Why God should do something? Why isn't God doing something? If he loved us, he'd do something. Like all those questions, like why doesn't God intervene and force this situation to go better, or at least the way I should want it to go, right? Yeah. Which would, of course, be better, because that's how I want it to go. And this is a really fascinating, tiny little picture, if we look at it, of when God knows. I don't think Judas's decision to betray Jesus, didn't just happen to him. It didn't just like in that moment occur to him. It says a little bit earlier that Jesus knew the ones that he'd called. He knew his disciples. He knew them. So he knew that in the days or weeks or months, I don't know how long, before that moment, that Judas had been continuing to make decisions like, this is really bugging me, or I think this is not fair, but I'm not going to talk about it. I'm not going to ask Jesus, why is this going on? I'm going to stuff it down, or I'm not going to talk about it, or I'm just going to, I don't know what I'm going to do with it. So he's been having these layers and layers of something going on to the point where this is his breaking point. But it didn't just happen to him. Yeah. It's just like people are like, I don't know what happened to me. Well, a whole bunch of stuff before you got there. But the fact that Jesus knew this was going on. And I would guess he probably was saying, so, hey, how's it going? Like, how are you feeling? And Jesus is like, no, I'm good. I'm handling this. I'm good, And Jesus is like, you're not, and this is going to end badly, but that's your choice. And so the fact that God, he made human beings to have free will, and he values that so incredibly. It is so precious to him. It's way more precious to him. Our free will is more precious to him than it is to us, even though it's ours. Because we think, I don't like how this is going. I think you should violate their free will and make them do what I want. I think you should make all those people in Ethiopia behave properly. Like all this going on in Ethiopia right now is the result of people's decisions, except maybe the locusts. But the rest of it is people's decisions. Selfish or power hungry or panicky or whatever they're doing, and it's affecting so many people. And so it's the same thing, and in this tiny, tiny little picture, you're seeing Jesus knew what was going to happen. He knew this guy had been making these little decisions all along, and he was at a point where he was just about to make this one last big decision, and Jesus didn't stop him.
Yeah.
He didn't throw him out. He didn't obliterate him. He didn't enclose him in a plexiglass thing where he couldn't go anywhere. Like he did nothing except say, go ahead.
And do it
If
quickly.
you're going to do this, then that is your choice. Go ahead and do it. So even though he knew that this decision was going to result in his own death. So every time that we think, man, why doesn't God do something and fix this? It's like because God values human free will so profoundly that he's willing to literally risk his own life. Not just risk it, but actually lay it down in order to have us have free will so that we could choose to be in a relationship with him. Like that is profoundly challenging. It's like that's a weird big thought. It's very strange.
That's really good. That's really good. Let me offer a prayer, and we'll close with a song. Father, thank you for taking, Lord, I am drawn to this idea that Jesus was telling people how to live without him after he's gone, before they realized what was about to happen. Thank you for your grace there. And I am drawn to, like Leah said, just the importance of practicing love, of loving others the way you have loved us. That is part of how we do this with Jesus back with you, back in heaven. Spirit, Holy Spirit, I would ask that you would prompt us, that you would guide us in this activity, that you would open our eyes and our minds to the things you would have us do that would be helpful for others who are part of the body. Thank you for this morning. Thank you that you have been working in our hearts, in our minds, in a continuous, in a consistent way. Thank you for being present with us and teaching us as your disciples. May you be glorified in us. We thank you. We love you. Amen.
Thank you for listening to our podcast today. New Life Ministries is located in Winnipeg, Manitoba. You are invited to join our service in person or over Zoom. Please use the Contact Us link to send an email to the church office and request the address or Zoom link. If you would like to use these podcasts as part of your home church or local church gathering, you are free to do so. We do request that you let us know. If there is any other way that we can help you in your ministry, please send us an email.